Well, good morning and welcome back to Bible class here at Grace Lutheran Church in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. Today we are going to be starting a new series which will go over the next couple of weeks that's going to be dealing with the dangers of secular education. We're going to break this down into several different sections. We're going to take the first two sections of this in our study today, and then we're going to go into a little bit more depth in some of the details of this in the coming weeks. Today we're going to take a look at the first two parts of this study, which are going to focus on what we see in our society, the current trends in America right now dealing with Christianity. And then we're also going to take a look at some of the factors that are driving these trends that we are seeing within Christianity in our culture today. After we lay that foundation with what we are seeing in the world around us, we're going to take a look at secular education as a whole. And we're going to look at some of the ways in which they're teaching those very things that are at the heart of the problems within our society. And then finally, we're going to take a look at what the solution is. We're going to take a look at what God has to say about what the Lord calls us to do as Christians as we consider educating our children. This morning we're going to begin with prayer, and over the next couple of weeks we'll be taking prayers from the Christian warfare section of the hymnal. These sections of the hymnal remind us of what the Lord calls us to do and the dangers that surround us in the world, and how the Lord calls us to be on guard as we go about being in the church militant here on earth. Let's begin with prayer. My soul, be on your guard. 10,000 foes arise, and hosts of sin are pressing hard to draw you from the skies. O watch and fight and pray, the battle ne'er give o'er. Renew it boldly every day, and help divine implore. Ne'er think the victory won, nor lay your armor down. Your arduous work will not be done till you obtain your crown. Fight on, my soul, till death shall bring you to your God. He'll take you at your parting breath to his divine abode. Amen. So as we begin this study on secular education, I'd like to begin with a little bit of an illustration or an example from familiar lore. So most people today are familiar with the account of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And I'd like to start with an illustration from that story or from that account as an example of where we're going to go with our particular study. Maybe you've heard the expression before, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Now, maybe you've heard the expression, but you didn't realize that it was tied to the story of the Iliad and the account of the war against the Trojans, or what is called the Trojan War. Paris of Troy had gone to Greece and had taken King Menelaus's wife Helen back with him to his hometown of Troy. And this is what started the Trojan War. Well, King Menelaus wanted his wife back, and so he brought all of his soldiers in order to siege Troy, in order to destroy it and to get his wife back and then go back home. For 9 years, this war raged on without the Greeks being able to penetrate the thick walls of Troy. And so the Greeks tried a different tact. They decided they would try to trick the Trojans. So they came up with this idea of building a horse, a hollowed out horse. Now they knew that the horses were holy to the Trojans, and they faked as if they were going to leave. So all of these soldiers boarded the ships, and the ships began to sail back to home again. And they left this hollowed out horse sort of as a gift for the Trojans. Well, when the Trojans came out and they saw that the Greeks had left, they saw the horse there, and it was decided, let's bring the horse into our city. Now, not everybody was excited about this. There were some that warned of the dangers of bringing the horse into the city of Troy, one of which was the priest there in Troy. And his statement there was, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. He said, don't be tricked by what they are offering to you. It looks like it's a good thing. It looks like it's something that they're giving to us, but there's something deceitful that's taking place in all of this. And so they went ahead with it. They brought the horse into the city. They rejoiced then in revelry of defeating the Greeks and enduring the siege. And that night, after everybody went to sleep in Troy, Odysseus and his men came out of the hollowed out horse, took care of the guards, opened the gates of the city, and allowed the Greek army which had returned into the city. The Greeks then wiped out the Trojans and destroyed them. So many people may be somewhat familiar with the account of the Trojan War, but this is where this phrase, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, comes into that account. So what is the meaning or the connection between that story? And again, that's not a real story. It's not real history. It's a story that was told by an old Greek storyteller. But there is an important lesson for us to learn in that idea of beware of Greeks bearing gifts. In this study, we're going to take a look at the modern account of the Trojan horse. There have been many atheists in our country who have used the educational system in our government as a means of deceptively undermining Christianity and the values that people of our country once had. Sadly, like many of the Trojans of previous years in the story of Homer, there are many Christians as well as Christian leaders today who have underestimated the enemy, and they have allowed that hollowed out horse of secular education to come into their lives. And just as the city of Troy suffered devastating consequences, so also our culture is experiencing devastating consequences as well. The result is that as human beings, and especially as Christians, we have underestimated the influence that secular education has had on our children. Now, for most of us, many of us, even older ones in our society, will remember pastors and even other Christian leaders warning about some of the dangers that have been around us in secular education for many years. Probably the most familiar of all of these is the idea of evolution and millions of years, which has been taught in our schools for a long time. But in reality, there are many much greater and deeper problems which largely have gone unnoticed within Christianity, or they've simply just been ignored as unimportant. But these deep-seated and false beliefs that have been pushed in secular education have not been addressed as they should have been. And in some cases, Christians have even supported these false ideas and views. So the result has been that the religious instruction of America's youth through secular education is possibly the largest contributing factor to the current decline in Christianity and the departure of millions from the Christian faith. As I mentioned, over the next couple of weeks, we are going to break this down and we're going to consider that very thing. Today, we're going to take a look at the current trends within American Christianity, what we're seeing, and then we're also going to take a look at the three largest factors that are bringing about those downward spirals within Christianity in our country. Next week, we'll take a look at the role that secular education has played in this decline of Christianity in our country. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the solution to this epidemic of the fall from Christianity in our country today. So let's start by taking a look at some of the trends that we are seeing within the United States of America. Now, these are trends that are obvious. As you take a look at the last 30, 40, even 50 years, you'll see how prevalent these statistical changes are in our country today. There's no doubt about it that as we take a look around, we can see that our society, the society that we live in, is becoming more and more secular with every passing year. Think about your own life. Think about what it looked like 50 years ago or 30 years ago, and look at society today. there's no way that we can look at the changes in our society and say that our society is becoming more Christian. Rather, the opposite is true. Listen to what George Barna says. He's a Christian who does a lot of statistics and polling. George Barna reports that 6 out of 10 20-somethings, those are people in their 20s, who were involved in a church during their teen years, are already gone. So what he's saying is that 60% of young people in their 20s who have grown up inside the church have now left the church completely and are no longer connected to the church at all. 60% of that age group. These are people that were once in the church but are now no longer in the church. 60%. Look again at some other statistical data from the General Social Survey, which comes from the University of Chicago. They've got a chart here. We're going to follow this chart as it highlights some of the different denominational trends that have taken place over the last 50 years. So 50 years ago, the largest religious group was what we call mainline denominations. This is the majority of Protestant congregations that are very prevalent in our society today. Now, this group of mainline denominations, they reached their peak in the mid-1970s. But if you take a look at that line, which is the bright blue or light-colored blue line on the chart, that has been in steep decline ever since the mid-70s. It's gone from just under 30% when it begins to just a little bit over 10% today. So in the last 50 years, it's dropped 20%. 20% of the population has left these mainline church denominations. Let's look at another one. Look at the red line on this chart. This is what is categorized as what are the evangelicals. So the evangelicals, while they started at below 20% in the 1970s, they steadily increased until the mid-90s. They topped out in the mid-90s at right around 30%. But now notice how even that line has declined since the 1990s. And that's dropped to just a little over 20%, 22, 23% today. So that's dropped 7% in the last 20 years. Then you also have another line at the top of this chart. It's the dark blue line. This is the trend within the Roman Catholic Church. Now that started at about 28% or so in the 1970s. And while it stayed in that, you'll notice that it has been on a slow decline too, dropping to again about 23% in the late 2015s. Now, the one thing that has maintained the Catholic numbers is the fact that you have a large number of Latinos that are coming from outside of our country that are making up for the ones within our country that are leaving Catholicism. So if it hadn't been for the Latinos coming into our country as immigrants, that number within Catholicism would actually be much lower. So we do have still a large number of people that are leaving Catholicism that have grown up in the Catholic Church. So these three major groups within Christianity, the mainline churches, the evangelical churches, and the Catholic churches, all three of them have seen some pretty significant declines in their numbers over the last 50 years. Now this is just statistics. This is what we're seeing. Now these are general numbers here. Let me make this a little bit clearer for you. In the past 10 years, so from 2010 to 2020, on an average, we have seen a closing of about 5,000 churches every year. So in the last 10 years, 5,000 churches every year. If you add those numbers up, you're talking about in 10 years, 50,000 churches have closed their doors. Now, if you think about that from a weekly perspective, that means that about 100 churches every week have shut down. They are no longer functioning as they were 10 years ago. Now, that's a pretty significant number. In the last couple of years, I've had some conversations with people in our area. I've talked to realtors and things like that, and what they're seeing is the exact same. They're seeing churches close their doors because they don't have the numbers. They can't continue to maintain churches anymore. You have churches that are shutting down and they're joining with other churches of the same denomination, or they're simply not able to function at all. And now you have these empty churches, and nobody wants to buy them because nobody wants to start a church that nobody's going to come to anyway. So these are the trends that we're seeing in the United States right now within Christianity. A steep and stark decline within churches across denominational lines. This isn't just a one denomination problem. This is a problem across all of Christian churches in the United States of America. So this is what we would call an epidemic. It's not local or specific to one church body. It's across the border throughout our entire country. Now let's bring it a little bit closer to home as far as some of these statistics. Let's talk about some specific church bodies, not just general groupings of church bodies, but some specific church bodies. Let's talk about the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It's the largest Lutheran church in the United States of America, and it's one of the largest mainline churches in our country. In the last 10 years, the ELCA's membership has declined 28%. It has dropped from 4.6 million baptized members down to 3.4 million members. Now that's a significant decline, 28% of its membership in a 10-year period. Now, part of that is due to the fact that in 2012, the ELCA, they passed a statement in their own church body that allowed practicing homosexuals to become pastors, or to be allowed to be pastors, practicing pastors in their church body. There were quite a few people that left that church body as a result of that synodical action. But there are still many people that are leaving the ELCA in large numbers and have been doing that even before that vote was done in 2012. 28%. Let's bring it a little bit closer to home again. Let's go to a more conservative Lutheran church body, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is also looking ahead and seeing that they're going to see some very similar numbers in decline in their own church body. In 2017, LCMS President Matthew Harrison said in a statement that he gave that he expects that the membership of the LCMS will decline by 500,000 members in the next 10 to 15 years. If you put that into comparison, that's about a 25% decrease in their membership as well. This is based on the numbers that they're seeing in decline in their church body right now. So both the ELCA and the LCMS, the two largest Lutheran church bodies in the United States, they have seen and are expecting to see a huge decrease in membership in the last 10 years or in the coming 10 to 15 years. Once more, let's bring it again a step closer to us in the CLC. The Wisconsin Synod is probably one of those congregations or church bodies that's closest to us in doctrine. The same decline is being seen in the Wisconsin Synod right now. The Wisconsin Synod has seen a steadily increase in decline in its membership over the past 50 years. From 1991 to 2001, so about 30 years ago, the Wisconsin saw a decline in membership of about 20,000 members. But from 2001 to 2020, they saw that number double, 40,000 members in decline. In other words, this is increasing in its rate of decline in the Wisconsin Synod, just as it is in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and just as it is in the ELCA. So these general numbers that we're seeing within Christianity, decline in churches, is not just everybody else that's out there. This is something that is affecting Lutheranism as well as other church bodies. If you bring it a little bit closer to home here in our own church body, the Church of the Lutheran Confession, we've seen a decline of about 7% in the last 20 years. So not quite as bad as what has been seen in the Wisconsin Synod or the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod or the ELCA, but still, again, a consistent decline in the number of people who are actively involved in church. So the one thing that we can come away with as we take a look at this trend within the United States of America and Christianity is that Christianity is declining across the boards all over in America in record numbers. Now, this should be something that is concerning to us as Christians. It's something that we should be asking ourselves, why is this happening? This isn't just one particular church body or just a small number of church bodies, but it's across the board. Now, back up and let's take a look at that statistical chart that we saw earlier again that had all the different denominations on there. If you take a look at those three lines at the top at the beginning, the light blue, the dark blue, and the red, we've seen all of those numbers going down. But you'll notice as you look at this chart, there's a light green number on there that from 1970 until 2017, that number, it's continuing to go up. It's the only number on this chart that we're seeing rising significantly. And that group that is rising significantly is what are called, it's labeled here as no religion. Sometimes this group of people is called the religious nuns. And by nun, we don't mean Catholic nuns, N-U-N, but a religious nun is a person who says, I don't have any religious affiliation. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they are atheistic. It doesn't mean that they have a belief in no God. But what it does mean is that this group of people do not go to church on a regular basis. They don't go to church at all because they are not tied to a direct church or denomination. These are people who say, I'm spiritual, but I don't need to be religious. And so this is the one religious group that we're seeing increasing in our culture in the last 50 years. In his book, The Rise of the Nuns, James White says that we're seeing this increasing number of Americans not identifying with any religion. And he says that this is a growing number in our society. They don't associate with any particular denomination, and they don't attend church. And that number now is 25% of Americans who say that they are not associated with any church. That's a pretty staggering number to begin with. There's 25% of, this is again people who used to go to church but are not going to church anymore. But what's really surprising is that this number of religious nuns is much higher among young Americans. Younger Americans make up 45% of this group. So if you take a look at your kids that are between 15 and 25 or 30, 45% of them are religious nuns. They're saying, I have no religious affiliation. I don't want to have anything to do with church whatsoever. So this is the first part of our study. We're taking a look at what we see in society around us. And what we're seeing as we take a look at our society and Christianity within our society should be something that is troubling to all of us. Now, as we look at those numbers, that in itself isn't helpful. We have to know what it is that is causing this trend to take place in our country. So that takes us into our second part for today. What are those factors that are most related to this decline that we are seeing in Christianity in America? Why is this taking place? Well, first of all, we have to realize that this trend that we're seeing in America right now today, it's not something that's new. You can back up all the way to the days of the early church, and you see those things taking place in congregations like Ephesus or Smyrna. These are churches that were established by the Apostle Paul in his missionary journeys, but the Apostle John would write later on in the Revelation saying these churches were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were falling away from true Christianity. So we see that in ancient Christianity. We can also see these declines in Christianity in a more modern perspective. In the last couple hundred years, we can take a look at what Christianity used to look like in European countries like Germany, which was the center of the Reformation. And if you were to go to Germany today, you'd see empty churches, people not going to church. So the trends that we're seeing here in the United States today are not new. They have been seen by other societies in previous generations and even previous centuries. The question is, what is causing this downward trend in Christianity in the United States of America today? Well, our country, when it was established on Christian principles. The majority of the founding fathers were Christians, and even those that were not, that were deists like Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, even those individuals recognized the benefits of the moral law which was found in Christianity. Thomas Jefferson was said to say, I don't necessarily agree with everything that is in Christianity, but it has the best moral foundation of any religion that I've seen. So over the last 50 years, we've seen these Christian principles that our country was established on to begin with literally tossed to the side and rejected by American society, either through legal action or simply by popular opinion. So what are the three cultural causes that are bringing about this trend in our society today? I would say that there are three major trends in our society that are moving the young people of our society today toward that view of, I'm spiritual but not religious. I don't need to go to church. Church is not important in my life. And the first of these is what we call relativism. Relativism is the idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth. That you can't say that there is something that is true for everybody. People that are proponents of relativism would say that truth is subjective. It's about feelings, and it's based on the individual, not on a corporate group as a whole. It's not based on everybody that applies to everybody, but each individual determines what is truth in their own life and in their own mind. Now, relativism has been the proponent of postmodernism since it came into prominence in the 20th century. Now, I want you to think about what this concept does to Christianity, a religion that teaches that there is absolute moral truth. If you have a belief in our society that says there is no such thing as truth, and then you have a religion that says, yes, there is such a thing as truth, and it can be known, and it must be proclaimed, there's a conflict between those two things. And what relativism has done is relativism has opened the door for what is called religious pluralism. Religious pluralism is the idea that there is not one religion that is right and all the rest are wrong, but each religion has to be accepted because there are tenets of these religions that are all true. And so what happens then is that you have a belief in, you can believe in whatever religion that you want, and none is right or none is wrong. It's all about what you feel is the best fit for you as an individual. So one of the battle cries of the relativists is, well, that's true for you, but it's not true for me. As a pastor, I've seen this over and over again in dealing with members who are caught up in particular sins. As you reach out to them as a congregation or as a pastor and try to point out that the way that they're living their life is not what God wants them to do, you have this response that is quite common, that you can't tell me what's right or what's wrong. You can't tell me how I should live my life. That might be true for you, but it's not true for me. I can live my life whatever way that I want to. And so relativism, while we see it evidenced in the world around us to a great degree, has also had a great influence on our young people and how they view Christianity, how they take it or leave it, but they're not bound by those absolute truths which God has revealed in His Word. So one of those cultural shifts is it's founded upon this idea of relativism. The second one of these ideas that are foundational to these changes is the idea of secular humanism. Now, maybe you've heard that phrase before. Secular humanism is the idea of trying to de-emphasize anything that is religious. It's putting an emphasis on the things of this world, the things that you can feel, the things that you can touch. So many times this is promoted by an emphasis on tangible science or evidence. And while there's some value in the tangible, the evidence of things in this life, and while there are many of these things that bring proof or evidence for the things of God and what is found and revealed in His Word, the problem with secular humanism is that it removes God from the equation and it puts man in its place. And so within secular humanism, what happens is that human beings become God. Since you remove any sort of religious idea out of the equation, there is no such thing as God, you have to fill that existence of God with something. And while many secular humanists or even atheists will say, no, there is no such thing as God, you have to have an answer for those things, and the answer becomes the human being. So in secular humanism, what happens is that mankind becomes his own God. He's the one who is the ruler and master of his own destiny. He's the one who determines all things. So secular humanism is dangerous, number one, because it removes God and anything religious from it. Secondly, it fills that gap or that vacuum of God with the human being, making him God himself. So we've considered relativism and pluralism, which is the result of relativism. We've talked about secular humanism and the removal of God and the replacement of the human being in its place. The third cultural shift that we've seen taking place in our society that has influenced this decline within Christianity is the erosion of the traditional, what we might even call the Christian family. I want you to think about some of the ramifications of this for just a minute and how we see this carried out or practiced in our society today. Think about the rise of sex outside of marriage. Think about the rise of cohabitation, living with a boy or a girl outside of marriage before you decide to get married. Think about the rise of divorce in our culture today, where you have young people who don't live with their birth mother and father, the broken family. All of these things, sex outside of marriage, cohabitation outside of marriage, divorce, separating, breaking up a marriage, all of these have had a significant impact on the traditional family and really the erosion of that traditional family. Now, that is bad enough as it is, but that has also had an impact on Christianity. Of those groups of people, those who are having sex outside of marriage, those who are cohabiting, those who are getting divorces, if you consider how active they are in church, those numbers are very, very low. Church attendance among families who are divorced are every other weekend at best. So the very best that you're going to get out of, again, on an average, of those that are from divorced families is every other week. When you have a single parent who's gone through a divorce, maybe not remarried, they go half as often as married couples do. And then those that are involved in cohabitation, their coming to church is basically zero. So think about how these factors are playing a role in the religious buildup, or we would say maybe the religious decline within Christianity in our culture still today. Now, this is just the current situation. Imagine the impact that is going to have now on the next generation. As you are not bringing your children to church, they're getting there less and less often as a result of the breakdown of the family. They have less positive role models in their lives. What is going to be the impact on that next generation? And we're already seeing that. If you back up and you take a look at the breakdown of the traditional family, we're now the next generation of that. And each generation continues to get further and further disconnected from God and His Word. So these are factors that are extremely serious, that we should take very serious in our lives and ask ourselves how these trends in our society, pluralism, or relativism, the idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth, secular humanism, the fact that there is no such thing as God and religious things are not important and man is the master of his own destiny, and the breakdown of the traditional family and the way that that looks, the way that it begins, how it continues on and is to be kept together as a necessary aspect of raising children that are going to be active and involved in society. Consider how important these factors are in where our children are going, what they are learning, what they are being exposed to, and how it is affecting them and their relationship to God. Now, as we come to a stop here, there are two questions that I would like you to think about and consider. I've thrown a lot of information out there to begin with. We've talked a lot about statistics. These are things that it's hard to dispute what we see as the statistics and the decline in the United States of America. When we start to discuss what the biggest factors are that are contributing to that very thing, there might be other things that you have in mind. Maybe there's other things that you have seen that you also believe is a very important factor in the decline of Christianity in our culture today. So I'd like to start by asking you this question. Would you agree or disagree that relativism, secular humanism, and the breakdown of the traditional family, that those three cultural shifts that we've seen in the last 20 to 30, maybe even 50 years, that those have played a significant influence or impact on Christianity during that time? So would you agree or disagree with that statement? So I'd like you to think about that a little bit and maybe share why you would agree with that or why you would disagree with that. Now, the whole purpose of this study is to have sort of a dialogue, a discussion about what is taking place, what is bringing this about, and what can we do ultimately in order to fix or do everything we can to stop that decline, at least in our midst, in our families, in our own homes. What can we do to stop that from continuing in the next generation? Then question number 2. We've considered 3 of those: relativism, secular humanism, and the breakdown of the traditional family. My second question is, do you think that you see other things that also play a significant impact in the decline of Christianity in our country? What changes have you seen take place, and what shifts do you see that also are playing an important role in what children are being exposed to and why they may be leaving the Christian faith in the record numbers that we are seeing right now? So one of the things that I think plays a large role, and it was mentioned by somebody at our pastoral conference, is the influence of the media. And that can be true of just popular media as far as what we're hearing on the news, who is controlling the media, what kind of information is being shared, but also from a media perspective as far as what we are seeing on TV, what we are seeing in the movies, what our kids are seeing on YouTube, what they're listening to on the radio. All of those things, those two have a significant impact on our children. They change the way in which they see the world and impact to a great degree what they're going to do, how they're going to live their lives. Now, as we consider media, we're just going to call it media in general right now. As we consider media, the point that I would make is that the media has largely been influenced by those 3 things that we talked about: relativism, secular humanism, and the breakdown of the traditional family. So in my mind, I see media as being one of the proponents that is advocating for these things in our society and spreading it. So it's the medium, not necessarily the result. But if you do have other thoughts as far as different, again, cultural shifts that you have seen take place in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years that you think play an important role in this, again, please share that with me. There's a number of ways that you can do that. You can either comment on this video, or you can go to our website. You can send me an email or give me a call. My contact information is on our website. Feel free to share that information in whatever way that you feel comfortable with. So next week, we're going to continue on with the mechanism, one of the ways in which we are seeing, just as we talked about media, one of the ways in which the secular education system is being used to promote all 3 of those religious cultural shifts or trends in our country: relativism, secular humanism, and the decline or the the breakup of the traditional family. We'll take a look at that in part 2 of our study next week. As we go through this study, I would encourage you to go through it with an open mind. There are many people that have, when they first discuss this particular topic, they sort of rebel against it. And what I want to do is I want to have an open discussion on these things. If there are things that you would disagree with as we go through this, please don't hesitate to share those things with me. What I'm trying to do is point out the evidence that I have seen in studies that have been done, in specific instances of families that I have interacted with and learned from. But again, if you have a different viewpoint, I would encourage you to share that. The whole purpose of this study is to open up a dialogue, a discussion about the things that are really important and what we can do in order to fix those things out of love and concern for our children, for the next generation, and most importantly, out of love for our Savior and what He has called us to do as His people, being a witness to Him in the world around us. So again, I invite you to share those thoughts with me as we continue our study through this and the dangers of secular education and what God has given us the opportunity to do as His church here on earth. Let's close with the benediction. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you now and always. Amen.